Awesome. We are live again with the KingdomHood Conversation. And you guys, thanks for being patient because we kind of had to change the time because I have a special guest on today. This man does so much work. I mean, when you look up the word philanthropy in the dictionary, you'll see his face next to it. He does a lot of work in the community. And I had the pleasure of meeting him and doing a little work from him. So it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Freese. Welcome to the KingdomHood Conversation.
Thank you, Richard. You know, I'm a big admirer of you.
I appreciate that. So I kind of wanted to bring you on. I mean, we're looking at the state of America right now, with, the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. We have all the rioting going on. And there's really like this gap. We're seeing this seismic gap between two Americas, one white and one black. But to much success is to the riot, you're seeing a lot of white Americans out there that are protesters for this issue as well. And I think for the first time, we kind of have the ear of America to make some change of this systematic racism that we have going on in this country and has been here for so long. But I think it's going to take a together change for us to make change. What are you saying? I mean, when you look at race relations in America, as a person of Caucasian skin, how does that affect you? How do you see it from your side? What experiences have you had with that?
So I reflect back in the early 60s because I grew up in West LA in the 50s, 60s, and never personally witnessed anyone being discriminated against during my childhood. But when I was about 8 years old, the protests were going on in the South. Dr. Martin Luther King, Man Ray Edelman, and other freedom fighters and the freedom riders. And I was shocked when my dad told me that, can you believe that in the South, black children are not allowed to drink from the same drinking fountain as white children? I was staggered and I wept. I just couldn't believe we had a world that was that cruel. And the more I've looked at it, and as I've grown up, when I was in the Army, I saw outright racism. I mean, it was like coached racism. It was, talked about in secret. And I remember guys from Alabama bragging about going out and looking for blacks to beat up on Friday night. That was just outrageous. So comparing those experiences, that was in the 70s, 60s, and to what I see now, I have two sons. They regularly have African-American friends over. They don't understand. It's not in their thought process of how you can mistreat someone or treat them or view them differently because of the color of their skin. So as in terms of a sign of hope, I think this generation of young people really get it and are determined to ensure that the racism of the past is overcome and that we take appropriate steps to remediate and remove those obstacles. I'm part of a working group that's going to be actually convening tomorrow morning from around the country to look at, what are the lasting legacies of racism that are in our justice system in terms of, how we're recruiting law enforcement, how we're recruiting judges, how we're recruiting lawyers and prosecutors. And we absolutely need a better process to screen for people who have hidden racism or they have a hidden agenda and they use their power to abuse others or as an outlet for their frustration or their bigotry. And the hope for me is that we're opening up the discussion. You can't change things unless you acknowledge it, right, and look at it and examine it and figure out what's wrong here and what do we do to have wrong. And I'm encouraged when Ron Jenkins and I were just on a class with young people from the inner city talking about their experiences, and he shared that having gone out into the streets to join the protests and speak with both the protesters and the police about their perspective, he said, I'm encouraged because there's a groundswell of people from all colors coming forward, not just whites, but also Asians and Latinos joining forces with African Americans because we're outraged and we want to change and we want to take advantage of this historic moment to move in a different direction that radically changes the experience of African American children in this country. So that's the grounding for hope that I see, but we have a long way to go. I think our justice system in particular, which I've studied for 25 years, has the legacy of slavery and bigotry in its very fabric. You have a lot of fear of privileged class individuals about African American youth and a lot of suspicion and anxiety, and it plays out in our justice system nakedly. And I've been in court where I just can't believe the lack of empathy. I've actually come to believe we need to have a jury of your peers. We need to have judges of your peers. One of the great hope bearers in our country are Judge Karen Bass, I'm sorry, Karen Bass, the Congresswoman,
Yeah,
gives me a great deal of hope.
yeah,
And, and then Judge Karen in the Compton Court, who's an extraordinary example of having grown up the child of a mentally ill mother, had experienced all kinds of extraordinary abuse when she was in childhood. She rose above. She now oversees the Compton Community Collaborative Court that looks at helping understand what are the causes of behavior and focuses on therapy and healing and keeping people connect with their communities as an alternative to punishment. There's a body of science called uh, trauma-informed care,
yeah.
and the ACEs, Average Childhood Experiences Studies, which shows that early childhood adversity translates to behavioral problems which require healing,
Mm-hmm.
and that if you try to punish and treat that in a way that's stigmatizing, you only reinforce that type of behavior, and it becomes cyclical. And enlightening our justice systems to look at understanding the profile of an individual who's acting out trauma, who's acting out the insecurity of poor treatment, of abuse, of abandonment, of neglect, of domestic violence, of witnessing domestic violence, and helping understanding that healing and therapy and involvement in the community, and as opposed to isolation and punishment and detachment from positive relationships. I mean, that really is a direction that the therapeutic justice model is moving in, that I think gives us hope for significant change.
Yeah, it's a good point. So, I mean, looking at it and fighting policy change, I know we have a physical change that we have to look at our inner city youths and making sure that we're dealing with the trauma, as you mentioned, the trauma that they can see in the inner city. That, as I saw growing up as a kid, and, I went through my, ebb and flows of life, and someone got a hold of me and was able to help me. But a lot of the kids in the inner city don't have anybody to mentor them or to help them through that process. And that's why they stay in this gap. And that's why people say, well, why can't they just do this? Why can't they just do that? Because if you're living in an environment where you see, things that are horrific, that goes into your psyche and it plays into your balance of your life. And it's crippling trying to move forward. So, I mean, the fact that we need to help, these young kids deal with their trauma so we can avoid, them getting into gangs, things like that. But, but then also too, is that it falls into this system, like, of racism, where we have the top power base that looks at young kids in the inner city and, look at them as animals, or those black kids, or those, or you don't even have to be kids, it'd be grown men. And until we can change this systematic process of racism, like, I was talking about the riots on my pop-up show, and I was saying we've had 85 riots since 1955. So you're talking, like 1.1, 1.2 riots a year we've averaged. And black men are still getting shot down on the street. So rioting in itself is not the position to do. It doesn't work. Now, it does bring attention to it, but it doesn't make systematic change. And I think now that we have this, the Floyd murder brought the attention, it finally made people not be to rationalize killing black men. So now we have to go about together, me and you together, whites, blacks, Asians, and every other race, to go about getting systematic change.
Absolutely. And I really think that it's a wake-up call, but also it gives you hope, because for the first time, there's no one is arguing at all about the absolute racism that happened in that case. And the groundswell support, the way Ron Jenkins put in, Ron's a retired corrections officer, it's been an embarrassment to law enforcement throughout the world, not just the country, but throughout the world. So it has created a teaching moment and a moment to join force. But ultimately, what are the specific initiatives that we can advance? And you've identified one of them, which is absolutely critical, and that is mentoring. When you feel differently about another person, you often have not had life experience with them. You've often not spent time in their community. You've often not spent time in their families, breaking bread together. And that lack of empathy leads you to draw conclusions. The wisest thing my father ever told me was never assume anything. Every person deserves to be judged for who they are and the choices they've made and on their individual virtue. And unfortunately, in the system that we have today, people are judged because of how they look. And I see that over and over again. And the only way to combat that is to really have, I think, prosecutors and judges and law enforcement that have grown up in the communities that look like the communities they serve, have grown up in the communities they serve, and advance community policing models. There's a model called the Missouri model, which is extraordinarily innovative. and progressive in that way, where they keep young African American kids, Latino kids in their community, and the community deals how best to address their transgressions or the issues of antisocial behavior. But the goal is not to institutionalize them. It's not to isolate them away from their community. It's to keep them in the community and to give them the support they need through mentoring, to have that mentor support to guide them, to be a voice for them, to champion their needs, and to let them know that somebody is in their corner. And I think that can make all the difference. I think particularly for our foster kids, many of whom are overrepresented by African American, having a mentor is critical, and it's a huge unmet need in our foster care community. And that those young people who age out of care on a fast track towards homelessness, towards incarceration, towards being exploited because of their poor safety net and lack of vigilant adults guarding their space, and they're exploited into domestic human trafficking. On 80% of all survivors of domestic human trafficking have come out of our foster care system. Mm-hmm. So to your point, Richard, about mentors, that of all the things our audience can do, they can begin mentoring young people and spending time with them and help learn about them, grow with them, and help guide them and co-advocate with them.
That's awesome. So look, we have it's almost like we have two nations, right? So we have inner city and we have suburbia. So I think I've always said that a lot of the reason why we have racism, first of all, education starts in the home. We know that. Racism is taught. People are not born racist. So, young kids that grew up in suburbia don't have much, access to black kids in inner city. How do we, we got to close that gap. And I always said that not enough black history is taught to white suburbia. Because if you taught black history in its full context, because everything happens in social context. So if you educated, our young white boys and girls on black history about how instrumental blacks were in America, I think it would be a major blow to racism. Because I really believe that, because racism comes from ignorance. But if you look at this 400-year history, how blacks were instrumental in wars, all the inventions that we created, everything we've done, but nothing but make America the military, political, and monetary superpower it is, and they had a full education of that, I think they would have a different aspect, because they see kids, they may hear stuff in the news, see stuff on TV, and they draw this conclusion. Maybe they have ignorant parents that teach them this racism. We see a lot of that, but they have no direct, proven, clear or evidentiary evidence about how we operate. So there's always this social gap, this divide between us that we got to close.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because this meeting tomorrow is with the American Bar Association, and it's advocates from around the country. And there was a letter by 1,100 African American law students and lawyers that were protesting that the ABA has not been more outspoken about what happened in Minneapolis and the need for radical change. And the tone of the letter was basically that most people in our system are good people, they're not prejudiced, and it failed to acknowledge that you have a structural system that puts people in power who make decisions over the lives of those who are powerless disproportionately, and in the powerless feel that they're not treated with justice or equity by the community. And until you change those structures, it doesn't matter how good the person is, the person who comes before you in terms of, I've witnessed this firsthand, young African-American young men in their early 20s have come out of foster care. They go to court. No one is there for them. Their public defender has 100 cases. He gives that person, 3 or 4 minutes of his time, encourages them to enter a plea for guilty to get a lesser sentence, and immediately criminalizes that individual. And there's a woman named Judge Songhai Maguda Armstead who's a former foster youth, African-American judge in the airport court, and she was the one that brought this to my attention, that she's seeing more and more young men like that, where they go to court and no one is there for them. They have no family, they have no support, and that's what our foster care system has done. It's socially isolated kids who most need that social protection and engagement and involvement. And having the ability to get mentors involved, again, I think is a recurring theme of connecting the worlds. The way you connect the social economic divide is have mentors from the privileged community join and experience with young people from the inner city. That's the only way to change that. And when they begin to build friendships, then suddenly the understanding and empathy begins to build, and those people influence their circles, and the dialogue changes in a more positive direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so I think that's that relationship has to start, because the only way we're going to change this system is for white people to acknowledge that we have a system of racism. Because we've been complaining about it for the last 165 years of a system of racism, whether it be coming out of slavery, whether it be going into Jim Crow, whether it be mass incarceration, the convict leasing program. We've been talking about these systems that target black men, and nobody cared. I mean, we've been complaining about police violence for the last 50 years. Nobody cared, and then some, because police have been killing black folks for 165 years since the conception of the police department. But now it seems that the ear is there, and the reason I want to have you on, because I want to make sure that we come together as white and black Americans and look at this system and know where we need to go and know where we need to change. We have policies. We got to change these policies. I mean, we have neighborhood segregation. We have income inequality. We have school resource inequality. We have school to pipeline processes, white supremacy, colorblind racism policies, disproportionate poverty. I mean, voter suppression. This goes on and on and on and on. So we have a lot of work to do. So we have, of course, we got to look at the voting, and we got to get people that are going to pass, they're going to change these policies, and then you and I got to work together.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, the only hope is that you don't give up and you join force and you reach outside your comfort zone to understand and listen. I felt like, having spent most of my career listening to kids who come out of inner cities and out of our foster care system and out of our corrections facilities, about, what are your ideas for things that need to change? Well, I'd like to have a prosecutor who looks like me, judge me, or I'd like to have a judge who looks like me, judge me, or a police officer who looks like me, judge me. Somebody I think can understand what I've been through in my life, as opposed to somebody I feel has no connection whatsoever with my experiences. And I can tell you the real danger is silent America, because exactly to your point, Richard, most of this will remain silent. People have prejudice, and they feel protected. As long as I'm protected, things are okay the way they are. And I think that crack in that wall is beginning to emerge, that you can no longer be silent. People are being forced to say, you have to take sides on this issue, that we need to do more, and we need to be more inclusive in being guided by the voices of those who suffered oppressive policies, to help enlighten us to the ways that we can be more humanizing in how we handle the issue of community engagement and building the community. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to build a community where we love one another. I mean, I come from a faith background.
Yeah.
And what I see as a fundamental injustice of America has been the legacy of the Jim Crow laws, that it wasn't just about you're different because you're black, but you're lesser because you're black. The humiliation that imposed on a people, to me, was even worse than slavery itself in terms of the hardship and bondage. It was setting a signal that you're lesser than, that you're inferior. And throughout the history of the world, that has been the unique form of oppression and dictatorship, is that like in Hitler, the Aryan population is superior. Yeah. But imposing a sense of inferiority on others is the worst thing a human being can do to another human being. Yeah. And this is finally coming to the point where we're recognizing we've done this, we're responsible for it. This has been our legacy, and we must go and do penance, so to speak, and do the right thing to find a way of correction. But it's got to be guided by those who have been most affected, to say this is what it takes for real change to affect us, the African American people, to feel that we belong and that we value and trust that you treat us equally. And ultimately, that's the greatest goal of civilization, is equal treatment for all of its citizens and equal opportunity for them. And those are the twin goals that we have to join force around.
Yeah, exactly. That's well said. I mean, because as long as a certain people feel that they're less than another race, we're always going to have this. We're going to be warring, because I believe that the United States is at its best when people are equal. But I mean, true and complete equality, not just this pie in the sky equality, but we have wealth equality. We have neighborhood equality. We have education that puts just as much money in education in the inner city as it does in suburbia. And, we have, less discrimination on the jobs, and healthcare is a big issue in African American community. You look at African Americans, we're leading all the categories that you don't want to lead in, as far as things that'll take you out of here early. That's because we have less access to good health than our white counterparts. So I mean, look, this is not a simple conversation. I mean, this is something that's going to take years and years. But and I want to be clear. This is not as white people as bad actors and black people as victims. That's not what this is about. I just believe that whether we're white, we're black, we're Indian, we're Asian, we're Arab, we're Latino, we have a responsibility to make sure that everybody can live freely, safely, and without prejudice in a constitutional democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well,
go ahead.
And ultimately, the goal is that no matter who you are in America, you should not need to fear that your children will be stopped by the police simply because they look like, the color of their skin or racial stereotypes. I mean, that ultimately will be the litmus test. If we reach an America where the African American community is not experiencing that, and that to me is I think this new protest movement is going to help begin change that. I think our police departments are going to be far more careful and reflective upon what they need to do to ensure that they're not manifesting discriminatory behavior through this, unwarranted stop that they've executed. I have a former foster youth mentee, and the number of times he's called me to say the police have stopped me again, it's been a wake-up call to me.
Yeah.
And part of me didn't believe it was true. I was like, you must be doing something wrong. I mean, that's what white America thinks.
Yeah,
so,
right.
You can't be having other people. And I witnessed it through him. I was like, oh my God. I complained. I wrote a letter to the Culver City Police Department. I've written a letter to the city attorney. He's actually a really interesting guy. He was on the People's Choice Award, and he managed to get up on stage and take the microphone from Sharon Osbourne and do a shout out for a record label he's trying to get on. And she kicked him off the stage. But when he was kicked off the stage, he was walking off peacefully, and she went up and kicked him twice from behind. And then they charged him with a misdemeanor and didn't charge her with a battery.
Of course.
So I mean, that's the kind of divide that happens where the institutions are going to protect people, and because of the color of your skin or your privilege, and aren't going to give a shit if you don't have anyone representing you. Luckily, he had me representing him, and it does make a difference. But I'm a big believer in mentoring and bridging the two worlds and bringing people together. And it's just spending time and trying to understand each other as human beings. And I mean, that's been the wonderful thing that what we've been doing, Richard, and with Ron and Lester and Damien Spencer, just having men's groups and meeting with young men to talk about their lives and try to begin to, for young men like you who never had that father in your life,
yeah,
you had to become the father you never had, and that was the greatest strength that you've had, and that makes you to me like the light on at the top of the hill that can shine hope for all individuals. No matter what happens, there's hope as long as we stay together and we look at those who've overcome.
I appreciate that. So you as a former attorney, I'm sure you had a lot of experience in this mass incarceration and, seeing black people going to, to the prisons and scores. Can you talk a little about that, the impact you saw that has on black men, the cases, you pick out a particular case you want to talk about, or the unfair treatment you saw of men of color?
Well, I see there's a comment that the white people, enslaved half the blacks with modern day slavery, so we have no vote. I absolutely agree. I mean, we have to rally around equal access to vote.
That's right.
So you have equal representation. With fairness, acknowledging when I grew up, there were no blacks in position of power. You have that across the country. You do have black leadership. We've had the first black president. We have many black governors, many black congressmen, mayors. So politicians, so the power base is there.
Yeah.
Don't forget that has to, galvanize and draw strength from itself. But it really comes down to coalition building and clarity about the goals and clarity about the challenges and being inclusive and understanding what is the perspective of those who feel they're powerless and how did that become that perspective and what can we do to change that? Mm-hmm. Where I see the most powerlessness, even more than in the African American community, is in our foster care system. If you talk with foster kids about their experience, it's basically being stripped of your identity, being stripped of any kind of agency, feeling you have no voice. By the time you age out of the system, you often are not prepared for work. You often do not, less than 50% have a high school diploma. Less than 3% will graduate from college. Mm-hmm. So what is happening with that system? And again, it disproportionately affects African American children, and the outcomes has just been absolutely horrific. 40% of our chronic homeless population have histories of foster care.
Yeah.
According to Department of Health, 70% of our state prison population, histories of foster care. So what is happening with that system and what can we do to change it? Again, I think mentoring and being involved with these young people to help them have a voice, to help them have someone in their corner, to prepare them to understand the power of their voice and the power of voting, so that they begin to become catalysts for the change for the next generation. So don't give up on the current system and say just because it's enslaved the blacks, the change can't happen now, and that we have to be part of that change. But it's incumbent upon all of us to say, I will be part of that change. I will do my part. And as long as everyone does that and joins force, there is hope.
That's right. Well, Sam Cooke said change is going to come. So we're going to stay hopeful that it does. You know, I think that, you know, along with looking at, you know, civil rights change, we really have to look at the wealth inequality change, because if white America owns 85% of America's wealth, and you got the median income of an African American is 13,000, but you have the median income of a white family that's 176,000. Until that gap shrinks, you know, we're still gonna have some sense of inequality, because at the end of the day, if you look at the power structure in America, it's all white. I mean, yeah, we had a black president, but even he was constrained and handcuffed by a Republican a predominant white Congress that didn't want to see a black man pass anything. And I'm just speaking from what African Americans are saying. And so they said, yeah, Barack Obama was president, but you have to have Congress to work with you. And they said the day this man was elected, we're going to make sure that he fails as a president. And we saw racism rev up under Barack Obama, because at the end of the day, the only thing Barack Obama really did was threaten white privilege. When you threaten white privileges, racism comes. And then so then he goes out, then you got this Trump comes in and he speaks the language of racism. Now it's galvanized a white racist movement where you had hate crimes that went up 360%. So it's almost like we went back 50, 60 years. You know, we celebrated because we had Obama in office, and everybody was celebrating in the streets and jumping around, and people walking up and congratulating me like I won the presidency, you know. And then in one swell swoop, that was all gone because reality set in. Oh, we got this black man in office. My white power influence is going to be impacted some way. Let's galvanize. And now Trump comes in, and now we're seeing, you know, then you got, you know, the Ahmaud Arbery case, and you got, you know, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the other that's been murdered. And now it's like where we keep going back. You know, it's like this. I say this. It's like we were in slavery, right? So we get out of slavery, somewhat slavery. And then we say, oh, fine, we made it. We did something. Then we get Jim Crow, and that kicks us back again. Then Jim Crow kind of goes away. Then we get targeted by the FBI. They put crack in our neighborhoods. And then they pass laws to throw the people in jail to sell or smoke the crack that they put in there. Okay. And now you got an occupying police force that's killing us all. So this is the mindset of a lot of African Americans. And this is why they have this disdain for this white power base. So I always say, until the power structure of wealth inequality, the gap closes, we have people of color that can come into a racist system and burn it down, along with, you know, with white people like yourself. We're still going to be in this holding pattern where people don't trust each other.
You know, it's interesting. As a white person, it's really hard to address those issues. Frankly, I think change will only come by the black community telling us, here's what's wrong. We've identified, and people can attract people of goodwill to say, here's a specific initiative that we can identify that absolutely must be changed. I think we absolutely need. I was shocked that this officer in Minnesota had 12, or someone told me 18 different complaints against him.
Yeah.
What was he even doing on the force?
Yeah.
There needs to be upfront screening of racist. If you think having somebody like do a check to say, has this person ever expressed a racist sentence to me? Has this person ever done something to another person because of their color that suggests to you that if they have power, they may exercise it in a racist way? I mean, we have to do much more thorough vetting of the people who have power over African American communities, over Latino communities, or inner city communities, where there's just an incredible sense of powerlessness. In terms of the wealth issue, I think America's got the greatest opportunity. I mean, look at your experience, Richard. Yeah. Despite everything you described, you've overcome.
Yeah.
You found a way to overcome and find your way, and you did it because you had an incredible spirit. You focused on what you can do as a father. You've been loyal as a friend. You've built community. You've been honorable. I mean, the core intestinal values that help us feel connected with one another and support one another are the most critical things that we possess. And we have to honor that no matter what community we're part of and join force around that. And if good people of goodwill and strong values support one another, you will see systemic change. And it's not going to be overnight.
No.
But I think you have a lot of goodwill. You have a lot of goodwill in the streets right now joining force and saying we're sick of the old system. We're demanding a new way of doing things, and we're looking to our African American brothers and sisters to guide us, as to enlighten us to how we achieve that. And I think the more we focus on that, we will see progress.
Beautiful. Well, Paul, as long as you're listening, to people like us, the real black folk, you can't listen to them black Republicans, okay, that are telling you that racism doesn't exist and that.
All right, I think we need a dialogue. I don't think anyone said racism doesn't exist. I think I've never heard anyone say that. It's ridiculous. Hey. But I do think we need to hear voices from all spectrums of our society, and that voices should be heard. We don't, drowning out another person because you think they don't belong or their perspective is not legitimate. I mean, that's been a recipe for horrific injustices throughout the history of the world. We really need to have the humility to listen to one another and understand. If we differ, at least have given the other person the ability to explain why they see the world differently. Right. But dialogue, to me, is a great hope of our time. There was a great saying by Albert Camus that between the forces of terror and the force of dialogue, a great unequal battle has begun. But it is incumbent upon we who are dedicated to dialogue to see the light and change the world for the better for all. And ultimately, it's for all.
That's awesome. Yeah, I say that because one of them, Larry Elder, said that when Barack Obama got elected. He said that racism no longer exists, and even you as a white man know that's a lie. But but it's really good about when we have African, and I'm saying this has nothing to do with you per se. But I'm just saying I think it's up to us is to make sure and that you guys understand that we have a lot of people. There's some black people that have an audience or that have a voice, and they don't represent us at all. And it's just it's misleading to you guys because not you because you're in the trenches. You're in the trenches. But when you hear people like a Candace Owens or a Larry Elders or some of these people that may be the same color I am, but you're more blacker than they are because they'll sit up and have this pie in the sky skew about what's going on in America, about racism doesn't exist, and we need to worry about black on black crime, and these people were killed because they were criminals and stuff like that. And you have a lot of the white power base that's listening to these clowns. Instead of taking a time like you to listen to me, that's going to give you the truth. I'm not about Republican or Democrat. I'm really about having an open dialogue with you and giving you the full what we're dealing with so we can work together and we can grow together.
Well, one of my favorite programs is Left, Right, and Center on KCRW, where you get perspective of the left, you get the perspective of the right, and you get the perspective of the middle. I've always kind of been in the middle. But I hunger for points of view, and I have heard Larry Elder speak. I don't think I've heard him say there's no racism. What I understood him saying was, yes, there's racism, but now in America today versus 50 years ago, you have more tools. And as an objective statement, that's a very interesting topic that I think should be very from all points of view. Opportunity today. I lived in a third world country, and I have to say, Richard, people were lucky to have a bowl of rice sometimes, and yet they were grateful and humble. It was in the Philippines during a Revolutionary War. I'll never forget that. I think to be born in America compared to the third world experiences, to be a person of privilege, no matter how much prejudice and injustice you may have suffered, you have opportunities in this country which are unique, and why people risk their lives to come to our country, not risk their lives to go to China or Russia. Let's never forget that. Freedom is the greatest virtue you can hold. And in this country, the freedom to express yourself, the freedom to express outrage, the freedom to protest, the freedom to point out injustice and oppression and illuminate it is the greatest force we have to change what's unjust and evil. And having the ability to discuss it openly is critical to achieve that. And I'll never forget, in the Philippines, we were having a discussion about human rights issues, and a Filipino friend, it was me and a Mennonite missionary, two whites talking about this, and he came over and said, "You Americans have no idea how lucky you are. If we discussed this openly in this country, we'd be pulled off and tortured and killed." Never forget the precious value of your voice, that everyone's listening to you now. in terms of the the African American community. You have a powerful voice. You have an audience that is eager to hear your ideas for how we move forward to change and humanize our experience and minimize the experience of young children growing up from being discriminated against simply because of the color of their skin or the community they grew up in. So that opportunity to me is a historic one that we have to seize. And ultimately, it's goodwill. Expect mistakes among us whites. We're the good-hearted ones are still going to be using our prejudiced minds to filter things, and do enormous things that may be perceived as wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a break to say we're here to hunger to learn and realize and recognize what am I doing wrong that needs to change, because I have to change the institutional racism that's been bred into my soul, and be conscious of it, and to meticulously change it to be the kind of human being I want to be towards my African American brothers and sisters. Yeah. And again, I come from a faith perspective. If we treat one another with love, you don't have racism, you don't have poverty, you don't have war. And summoning a spirit that is humble before others to help them see the way that you fail, to be the full loving human being that you're called into this world to be, to me is a critical exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is too, is that, Paul, the only thing that we could ask white America is just to listen and then believe in what we're saying. Because I think up to this point, it's been a lot of talking, we're screaming about this is what the problem is. And until now, nobody really cares. You know what I mean? If George Floyd was just, I really believe, just thinking positive, that it's going to be the tragedy that changed the trajectory of America's racism system.
I think so. Yeah. But we're seeing a groundswell support against the institutions that created that evil, and they're demanding change. It's going to happen. We have to keep the momentum burning and move it forward and not give up on it.
Yeah.
And go back to the old ways. Yeah. But the forces out there, oppressive forces, once they have power and wealth and want to protect it, they can be extraordinarily evil and challenging.
Yeah.
It's difficult to overcome. But to be mindful of that is critical too, to your point about the economic divisions in our country.
Yeah, economic. I'm gonna try to. I think Ron's trying to call in. I'm gonna try to bring him on. Hold on a second. Let's see if I can bring him on. Yeah, see, I'll bring him on. I'm trying to bring Ron on. But yeah, so I just think that as long as that we can listen to each other, communication is key, and I think that communication has been broken down. And we're still seeing, and these are outliers. This is not the total, because we're seeing a lot of white and black and Asian people marching. These are outliers, but you still have those people who are out there saying, well, I'm getting people sending me a message. Well, George Floyd was a piece of what, and he deserved this, and it really, of course, you don't want to listen to people like that, but it really comes to it really is deflating in a lot of sense, even though we keep going and we don't, let that stop us. But we're still fighting this evil together. And like you said, I think once we come together, in true harmony, ready to do, I'm talking about systematic policy change, community policing. My ideas on community policing is you can't police a community that you know nothing about. So police officers actually live in or around that community.
I agree. I think that's an aligned approach. Absolutely.
You should be in it.
But I also think that bring.
Wrong.
I talked a lot about the community model, and I think it works very powerfully.
Yeah.
We have to find ways to bridge those two communities so they can grow better together. I think I hear another voice.
Yeah. So, right. So I just think that, once we get this true community, and like I said, this is a long process, but I think it's our responsibility, and I'm all about public policy, 50% personal responsibility. So the personal responsibility of the Black community is to say, this is what we're dealing with. These are our demands, and this is what we want. And then I think it's responsibility of white America just to listen and then act.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Colin Kaepernick was protesting about, and they blackballed. They wouldn't listen, and then now
he has a huge audience. He's got a huge audience. again, the power in America is you have a voice, and you have people that amplify your voice. And I think this movement that we're seeing is going to have a huge voice. And rally around that voice and demand the change that all human beings deserve.
Right.
Period. I think the time has come that really can happen. But I really think our Justice Department, our prosecutorial systems, our law enforcement has to really radically revamp their operations.
Yeah.
To recognize the way that they've been, instrumentalities of the privilege.
Yeah. I was watching the news, and these officers in Buffalo, they pushed this older white man down, and I think they cracked his skull. So the police chief disciplines those two officers, and I think like 50-some officers resigned from that police force, because I think the police chief, I think it's the mayor, I think the mayor's African American, and they resigned. So we still have this resistance out there. There's this kid that was shot and killed during the riot. So we still have this resistance out there, but I think now that, white America, we have the ear, I think it's good that we can come together and listen. So, yeah.
Well, I hope all your audience reads your book, Dad at 14. To me, it's a national American treasure. It's packed with wisdom, but also give the tools of resilience, tools of courage and insight. It's extraordinary work, Richard. I've told you, if I do nothing before I die other than promote your book, I've done a good thing.
Oh, man. Yeah,
it's true.
Man, you've been a big help. I mean, that's the one thing I say is you've been a big help to me. I mean, just allowing me, just trusting me to talk to the young men, and women that you work with, and then reading my book and liking it and pushing it. I really appreciate that.
Well, you push people to excel despite their circumstances. You push people not to get preoccupied with what they can't change. You push them to focus their energy on where their lives can be better. And no matter who people are around the world, if they can have that personal discipline, they will have a better chance of success and a fulfilled, thriving life. And you've achieved that.
Oh, yeah.
You embody the wisdom of the book.
I appreciate that. So, that's where we're trying to help. We're trying to get, like you, we're trying to get out here and fight the system of racism at the same time, get a hold of our young men in our inner cities, and make sure we can do all we can for them as well. It's good.
Absolutely.
It's great to be a go-getter, but it's better to be a go-giver. So
one of the initiatives I'm working on is to try and organize mentors for foster youth through the education process. Through the IEP, Individual Education Plan process, you can have an assistant. And I love that idea of white retirees being an assistant to young African American students to help them whatever way the student wants help and invites to help. But the student basically has a choice over people who are willing to volunteer to support them in preparing what's called an independent living plan, which often is neglected when they age out of the system. So they have someone with a lot of life experience who has the opportunity to walk a mile in their shoes and understand this young person, understand their challenges, their dreams, their frustrations, the mistreatment they've experienced, and have a caring, listening presence in their life to help guide them towards a more hopeful future, and certainly to guide them away from feeling, and this is what I heard from kids in the streets of Hollywood. By way of background, I worked in Hollywood for years offering free legal clinics to street kids. And I'd ask, how'd you end up on the streets? I ran away from my group home. In 1994, when I first started doing that, I'm like, what's a group home? It's where foster kids go. What's a foster kid? I had no idea. Entirely invisible population. And that has to change. And it was 75% of the kids coming into my legal clinic had been on the streets because they've been aged out of foster care with no safety net, with no loving home, with no resources, with no training, and are expected to survive. And so many of them would sell their bodies to have a place to stay for the night, and then they get pulled into human trafficking. So many would commit street crime just to have something to eat, and they get pulled in our justice system, and no one's paying attention to circumstances. So that, to me, as a lawyer, is something that I radically want to see change. And the group I'll be meeting with tomorrow on a Zoom meeting is focused on exactly those kind of initiatives of humanizing our justice system to look at the individual circumstances and to err on the side of giving tools of opportunity and change to the individual when they come in contact with our corrections facility, and not isolate them, not detach them from positive nurturing relationships, not put them in an oppressive environment that strips them of all agency. Everything we know about trauma and how it affects the human being and a psyche and their identity that our corrections institutions are imposing has to change. And again, I think the street movement is going to help bring impetus around those more enlightened approaches.
That's awesome. The work continues. I'm trying to see if I can.
Yes, it will.
Yes, sir. We got a few more minutes left. I'm gonna see if I can bring Ron in. Let me see. Hey, Ron, are you there? Let me see. Ron, are you there? Okay, I'm gonna put you on. I'm gonna put you on speaker. I'm trying to get Ron in. You gotta turn your volume down. He has volume up. He has his volume up. I'm trying to bring Ron in. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Here you go. All right, man. So I got Ron on. We got some technical difficulties. We got Ron Jenkins on. He was, of course, on last week's show. So welcome, brother. So Paul Freese is on, and I know you've been listening to the conversation. So I just want you to chime in and just give us your thoughts on, what we talked about so far.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Ron. Ron's one of my heroes to your audience.
Hey, Paul and I just got off a Zoom with the kids at Harthar Middle School and trying to find out where their mind is with this COVID and the recent incidents that's happened. So we were checking in with them to make sure that they are doing well. But I did hear some of your commentary going back and forth. This is not the first time it's happened. How many will it take before changes are made? Paul, I heard you talking about, this situation and what we as African Americans need, and we have to come to the table and say, this is what we want. Well, we've done that. We've done that many times. This is not the first riot that we've had. This is not the first riot that we've had based on social injustices such as what we're dealing with the Mr. Floyd case. And the Floyd case. Okay, let's just make that one incident. Okay, that's the incident that fueled the fire all over again. And then we go back to the Natasha Harlins. We go back to the young man from Georgia. We go back to I Can't Breathe. We go back to all of these different scenarios, and not to keep the negativity to the forefront, but when is there really enough? Because we've already said this is enough. We've said it a million times. This is enough. Now, Paul, you and I went to two events last year. One at USC, the Game Changer, in which we were discussing community relations with LAPD. And then we went to another event in which we did a screening, and there were I think it was 3 or 4 young black men were accused of a crime, and they were given juvenile life. And the question was, should they be retried, and given a lighter sentence? Now, in the Game Changer event, I posed the question: how are we when we're not talking about systemic racism? In the film event, I posed the question again: how are we talking about the impact that this situation has on the lives of these young men if we're not talking about systemic racism? Okay, systemic racism. The problem with all of this is this. Yes, we've had a black president. Yes, we have black mayors. Yes, we have black teachers. We have all of that. But the problem is we don't have enough of them. And the reason why we don't have enough of them is because at some point they're getting stopped at the door. Yesterday I heard on the radio station D.L. Hughley. His point was this: Bank of America wants to give $1 million to organizations that support African Americans. Well, D.L. Hughley said this: keep your money. Change the way you do loans. Allow us to come in and secure these loans and don't be so scrutinized with our financial history or our credit situation or situations like that give them reason to say no, but it's really because they do not want to bring that economical gap together, because it's all about money. And when it's all about money, some evil has to be in there. And unfortunately, the evil in this is systemic racism, which has held us back for 400 years. And you can say that, we've come so far. Yes, we have come so far, but not enough of us have come so far, because racism still exists. It's pretty much been the equalizer to our race in terms of us coming up out of those places that we were forced to be in. Okay, so something different needs to be done. There needs to be a different conversation, and this is horrible that in 2020 we're still having these conversations and we still keep singing the same song of things are going to change. We need to do something different. No, they need to do something different. We're standing at the door. We've been standing at the door for years, waiting for them to do something different, and nothing different has been done.
Yeah.
Is there a place in America that you've identified where you feel that they have overcome systemic racism, where the experience is not as oppressive? Is that something that's come up in the conversations of here's where they can do it right? This community is really making progress. So I always look for examples so we can have a better enlightened understanding of the direction to move in.
The example is make this a 50-50, 100% relationship and not a 60-40, 70-30. That's the example. It's simple math. It's simple math.
So I'm trying to understand in concrete terms, what does that look like? What's changed? Do you think? Can you identify that we need to move towards?
America has to get it in their head that we're just as important. Come on, Paul. We are just as important. Yeah. I know you know that.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean,
but when you talk about systemic racism, you're talking about systems in place that have to change. I see the impact of those systems in the justice system. I see them in terms of African American young men not getting appropriate understanding of their circumstances and attention to extenuating circumstances, and that's something I see that I fight to change. And the models that we're advancing to change that, where you look at the whole person and you err on the side of healing and support and mentorship and guiding them towards involvement and healthy involvement and productive involvement in the community versus punitive isolation, punishment, further stigmatizing you and sending a message you're meaningless to society. That's one area that I identify as a concrete way that we can begin to attack the systemic problems that you're talking about. So to me, when I look for solutions, I need concrete ideas that as an advocate I can begin to advance and champion. So my challenge to you and Ron is come up with concrete, very clear ideas of what you've seen in your experience that absolutely should change, that is achievable if the right people get behind it. And we're not going to solve that in 5 minutes here, but I just wanted to have that, spark that challenge.
It's not going to be solved in 5 minutes. And
I agree. Never will be.
You mentioned me and Richard. Okay. I worked for the department for 30 years.
Yep.
I know 1,000 guys like me and Richard in their heart. I know 1,000 guys like me and Richard in their heart. But I also know that same justice system that you just talked about provided all of these services and resources. The problem is not what they're providing. The problem is when these young kids engage police officers who have an idea that they are above the situation that they're currently in, and they either falsify reports or they arrest people who shouldn't be arrested. And Paul, once you get in the system, like the juvenile judge, I forget his name, like he said openly, If you're a juvenile in the juvenile court system and you don't have enough money to pay for an attorney, you are toast.
Yeah.
The justice system is a bunch of plea bargains, a bunch of conversation back and forth to get this young juvenile to understand that he doesn't really have a choice in terms of getting out and not being charged, therefore not having a record. He has to make the decision to say, okay, I'm going to do 5 years instead of 10 years. So I'm going to plea bargain. I'm going to plead guilty to something that I know in my heart that I did not do.
Yeah.
I've seen it a million times. That's the problem. It's not the resources that they provide. It's the point of entry that we're talking about here. These officers, this court system, that's not allowing young black men a fair chance. That's the problem.
So what would you do to change that, Ron? You know the system.
They have to change the system. They have to change the mindset that you can't just treat young black boys like this. It has to be even all the way across the board. We already know that young white kids who the same crimes, the same situations, get less sentences or no sentences at all. We already know that.
Yeah, so we have a lot of these judges, that you walk into a court, and I've been in this situation. So you walk in the courtroom, and ain't nothing black in the courtroom except you in the judge's robe. And they, like I said, they say, okay, they don't want to go to trial, like Ron was saying, to, spend all that money. They know you got a public pretender, or we call him prison dispatcher. That's not
They don't have the money. They know they
right.
don't have the money.
They don't have the money, right? Right. So they know you have to have a public defender, which actually works with the DA, which actually gives you to do a plea deal. And the crime.
All right. So I want to challenge. All right, I'm going to challenge you, gentlemen, because I work a lot with public defenders. I've seen really magnificent ones. I've seen really horrible ones. I've heard that from street kids in Hollywood. The public pretender, not defender. I would like to have them come on and talk with you about these issues.
Okay.
These are really hard, difficult issues, but I mean, I personally felt like Judge Karen Ackerson-Goff, who runs the Compton Community Court, she has a model that should be embedded in our communities that engages, personnel and the community as representatives. When a young African American is charged with an offense, they have an audience and people judging them who have gone through their life experience, who have every capability of assessing them fairly and equitably and doing the right thing. That, to me, is the vision of the change I see, is that you have no right as a privileged, protected white person with no life experience in inner city to judge an inner city kid, period. I don't think you should be allowed to make that judgment. We have to find a way to have somebody who's got empathy because of lived experience and shared social and emotional connection with communities to make those judgments, and we're not doing it. That, to me, is an example of systemic racism that's been entrenched that has to change. And the power and logic of power and privilege is you don't let people threaten you. You're going to keep it at all costs, and one tries to mitigate it and eliminate it. And I think, again, what you're both doing is helping call out and demand the system be more retrospective and more transparent about what's actually happening, what the experience is. Nobody that I know in law school would say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go after young African-American young men. Nobody I ever met in my legal career would say, I'm going to wake up this morning, I'm going to punish some guy because, 20 years ago, some black guy did something to me. I've been, balling up fury my whole life. It's a far more subtle issue than that. And the power dynamic of being a cop, I got to tell you, because I've been stopped by police and I've seen it when I did nothing wrong when they stopped me. And all I could feel was this is power and this is evil. And they don't give a damn about what's right. They don't give a damn about what's fair. They're imposing their power and their position and their ego upon me and demanding that I do what they tell them to do. And that's all they care about. That dynamic's got nothing to do with color. And it's a huge dynamic. When people have power over another human being, they tend to be oppressive. And I've seen it throughout my career in every social situation.
No.
Go ahead, Ron.
the numbers does not support that it has nothing to do with color.
Right.
The numbers does not support that.
All right, Ron, do you know that more whites were killed by police officers last year than blacks?
Yeah. Well,
yeah, but they didn't have a knee put in their neck.
Let me answer this question. Hold on, guys. Now, Ron, Ron and Paul. Now, look, Paul, I hear this argument a lot and again, I hear a lot of black Republicans say that. And what they're doing is, what you're saying is true if you're basing it off raw numbers, because you're comparing 64% of the population to 13% of the population. There are more white people in America than black people. But if you break it down by demographics, and you can go on policemappingviolence.org and see all this. In 2019, 1,099 people were killed. 1,095 of them were black. The police killed 3 people a day. There was only 27 days last year where a cop didn't kill somebody. Black men are 9 times more likely to get pulled over, we're 3 times more likely to get killed, and we're 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed while we're killed. Look, you got. Let's say for example, all things are equal. Well, it can't be equal, but let me take you here. You got George Floyd, who people talk about, he had a violent past, and he's this, and he's that, and he's a piece of shit. This is what white people are saying, and he deserved what happened to him. But yet you got Dylan Roof that went into a place of worship, shot 9 people, and the cop took him to the McDonald's because he was hungry. You had a white dude that killed 2 people. The cop sat him down and fed him water and hydrated him and helped comb his damn hair because he was thirsty. But you got a Freddie Gray, you got a Sandra Bland, you got a Joseph Mann, you got a Freddie Blue. You cannot find me a Walter Scott, a Eric Harris, a Philip White. I can go on, a William Chapman II. You can't find me a white example of those. You cannot find me a white example of George Floyd. You cannot find me a white example of Tamir Rice. You cannot find me, a white example of Sandra Bland. It just doesn't happen. So you're talking about this military occupying police force. That police force was invented to catch slaves, and they've been killing us ever since. And you're talking 165 years of absolute murder. We know that the KKK have penetrated the police department. We know they consider black men animals. So it's not the same, Paul. You cannot compare 13% of the population to 64% of the population and say more white people are getting killed than black people. Break it down by demographics.
No, I'm not. All I'm saying is look at the facts and never assume anything. We're making a lot of allegations about.
These are facts.
There's
He's giving you facts. He's giving you numbers.
I'm giving you numbers. But I'm breaking it down, and it's not just you, Paul. You get black people to say that nonsense because they want to get in the good graces with white folks.
Let me interrupt.
Hold on. What I'm saying is, you go back when you get a chance. Go back and do some research and break the numbers down by demographic, and you'll see what I'm saying. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I agree. First of all, let's look at the facts and let's discuss them and go through them thoroughly to guide the change that we're talking about. One of the things I feel would really be helpful would be to organize a system that allows representatives who are trustworthy to evaluate prosecutions and to have the power to say these are not warranted. There's no evidence here. There appears to be a product of racism, and to have a very granular on-the-ground project that would go in and have the ability to, without any prior notice, to come in and look at the prosecutorial evidence and have the power to release them through like a probation commission or a sheriff's oversight committee, which we now have in LA County. But to make it to give it that kind of traction and ability to change the forces that you're describing.
Yeah.
The other way is to do better hiring practices, make sure that there's no history of racism in the past of the individuals. Like I said, this officer had 12 incidents of abuse that were complained. He shouldn't have been on the streets. But those are specific, concrete ways we change this. Otherwise, raging against systemic racism at some level, I can tell you from the white perspective, they're going to say, well, this perspective is defending bad behavior is one of the perspectives you hear. They won't talk about, but you should be mindful of the fact if young men weren't committing these crimes, would they be policed at all? Why in the Asian community we don't see the same kind of policing? They're people of color. There's a lot of prejudice towards Asians, towards Chinese. Vietnamese that have persisted throughout the years. They are enemies. So all I can say is we need to look at the facts. We need to have any evidence whatsoever of prejudice that has resulted in a young African-American person being in any kind of incarceration. We should have the power to liberate them through citizens' initiatives that can overpower the police force, it can overpower prosecutors. That's a body I would like to see emerge, and I think individuals like you and your networks would be the critical champions of that model.
Ron, you got anything you want to say?
I just want to say that I agree with a commission. But even before it gets to the commission, there needs to be better leadership in our police forces across the nation.
Yeah.
There needs to be.
I agree.
There needs to be a no tolerance, brutality policy, just as there is a no sexual harassment policy. And they need to hire individuals who understand our communities, and it would do them some good. It would save them these $1 million lawsuits, which is what their goal is anyway. But, they feel like they can get around that within this system. But they need to really spend money in training, and they need to set examples by holding officers accountable. It's time to get rid of progressive discipline. Progressive discipline only says to an officer who thinks he's above the law, I have another chance. I have another chance. And Paul, you talked about the mental aspects of what happened in this case. Yes, I agree with you. This guy had to have some issues interpersonally or from being on the police force, because I'm going to tell you, you may come in as one person as a police, but you do not leave that same person. And if you're not creating balance in your life in terms of seeking either, what you do with your family, treatment, therapy, or whatever it is that you need to do to create a balanced way of thinking, you need to do that, because policing is not easy. It's not easy at all.
Yeah.
So all those areas are of concern, Paul, but I go back to what I said earlier. These guys that are out there with an intent to put young black boys in a situation in which they can't overcome is a problem. It's not the only problem, but it's a problem, and it needs to change, and it needs to change through training and better leadership.
I agree. You both are very eloquent spokesmen on powerful ideas for change, and I support every one of them. As an advocate, what I try to do is identify individual cases where I've seen abuse, and then do everything I can to rectify that and identify those responsible for it and hold them accountable.
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely a good start. I mean, and again, we know you're not responsible for the system entirely, but I mean, so thank you for listening and understanding. But I think nothing is going to change until we have dialogue like this, because see, one of the things that you innocently say, and I don't take it anything malicious from you, Paul, at all. But when you say more white people are killed, essentially what that does in so many ways is disempower our worth when it comes to mapping out what we mean about black men getting killed, because we hear that argument all the time. That's what white America's been saying for a long time, or well, either that or they just flat out don't believe us. And that's why this is continuing. We have to get white America to accept that Black communities are subject and dealing with on a daily basis to paramilitary occupying police forces that have a neo-fascist mentality when it comes to looking at the Black community. And
but again, Richard, when you use that language, I want you to be aware that you are suddenly, getting the dander on the back of law enforcement across the country, most of whom do not wake up thinking I'm going to hurt somebody because they're Black. That's the danger of that language. That's all I'm trying to bring to your attention. I'm not denying the legitimacy of your point of view at all. I'm just saying that you should be mindful of how it affects the audience. Because if we're going to change attitudes, the last thing you want is for them to write you off and say, well, he's extremist. He just thinks this is that we're militarized. If I become a police officer, all I care about is hurting the Black community. I'm just telling what the thought process is that some people buy into, and how language affects them. Just like the language I use affects you. That's what dialogue is all about, is trying to figure out what are we trying to achieve: justice, fair treatment, improved policing practices, better discipline, ensuring that no person who's innocent gets involved in our justice system, recognizing that disproportionately Blacks are involved just unfairly and are targeted because of the legacy of racism, which none of us deny. But how do we move progressively to change that? And what specific ways can we do that? I believe that the Missouri model, where communities have the ability to make the choices about those from their community and prevent them from being isolated, criminalized by the privileged. That type of model is what we need to look at and build around, taking the passion that's been harnessed righteously to help create that momentum around that movement. But there are models that ultimately it comes to, like Ron, you've got, and Richard, you've experienced the system, you've seen it firsthand. What would you change about what you experience, and what are your ideas to achieve that? And that's what people like me in the white community who have nothing but goodwill and want to support the right thing and create a more just society for all people want to support. But the more concrete we can get, and the more you can put force behind ideas of how we achieve that, the more likely we are to achieve progress.
Well, the reason why I'm saying, go ahead, Ron. Go ahead, Ron.
I just want to make a quick comment. I was introduced to the Missouri model. I'm not a fan of the Missouri model in a correctional setting, because I believe that in a correctional setting there needs to be a combination of safety, discipline, and treatment. And the Missouri model in a correctional facility does not go well, because you have the kid from classroom A, B, C, and D in the same environment who are feeding off each other. So, the Missouri model, I've seen it introduced, and I've seen where it's created more problems and stress for the staff, which creates burnout, which causes people to make bad decisions and use wrong discretion when dealing with people. Now, I do agree with it, maybe on the, juvenile level, but, or used in the classroom, or in the YMCAs, or in these programs that are in the communities, the nonprofits that are existing in our communities, where these young people need that difference in lifestyle. The Missouri model, to me, is not effective in a correctional setting, because it puts too much responsibility into the youth's hands, and it handcuffs those that are trying to make a difference in their life. And really, it's a bunch of paperwork, or a bunch of words on paper that says our numbers look good, but we're really not doing anything different. I've seen it. This is just my personal experience. they changed the language, but they're still doing the same things. And I know that it won't change unless attrition comes into play, because you have to get the bad officers out who have a penal way of looking at things, and you have to bring more educated, fresh officers in and train them the right way before, in order for this type of system to work. Because to introduce it to an officer who's already been on the job for 15 to 20 years, he's gonna buck it. It's not gonna work, because the brunt of the work is done by those officers that are on the line, not the supervisors that are pushing the new programs.
So do you know of a superior model, Ron? Because I thought the Missouri model was highly acclaimed as being far more humanizing.
I agree with that part of it. But you got to remember, I said I've seen it introduced in a correctional setting, and I just feel like you lose control. You lose control because everybody's hesitating. Everybody's thinking about what they should do instead of doing what they need to do. And that's just my personal experience, Paul. I was in the department when they first came out with this Missouri model deal, and basically what it did was it gave these environments 20 PSPs, 45 big screen TVs, leather furniture better than the furniture that I have in my house. And so if you ask me, why do I need to go home if I got a leather couch with 20 PSPs and 40 big screen TVs? Why do I need to go home? Because I don't have this at home. And on that note, gentlemen, I have something to do. Richard, I love you, brother.
Love you, man.
I love you too. Paul, I'm glad you decided to be a part of this. And I just want to let you know that you'll always be our mentors.
Yep.
And thank you for allowing us to share space with you in this fight that we have for youth across America. And like Paul always says, keep up the good fight. But at the end of the day, systemic racism needs to be dealt with. We can't have another brother killed in the streets talking about what we was and what we gonna do, and this is the final one. You guys take care. Peace, love. I love y'all, bro. Out.
Love, man.
Let's see, Ron. Give me hope.
Yeah, so we're definitely keeping up hope. My position on this, Paul, is that we have to accept the ugly reality of policing in the Black community. Now, I know, and I'm not embellishing my words. You have no idea what I've seen, and you have no idea what these young Black men are subjected to. It is a paramilitary occupying force, and they call.
Oh, wait a second. Remember we had lunch. Remember we had lunch after you spoke at the class.
Yeah.
And I asked you, when's the last time you were stopped where you felt you were stopped because you're Black?
Oh,
and you told me it had not been a long while. Was that true?
It's absolutely true.
Yeah,
it's been a very long.
And even I'm just saying, I know for a fact Blacks are stopped because they're Black. Nobody doubts that for a minute. I've seen over one of my colleagues' husband's a judge in Manhattan Beach. He gets pulled over all the time. It happens, and I wish I could do more to change that. The question is, what are the consequences if I'm pulled into jail because I'm Black and I've not done anything? That absolutely is something that has to be fought heart and soul by everyone. Period. As a fundamental injustice, and identifying those cases to me is a critical thing as an attorney. What I try to do is be part of understanding, who are the good people in the system. Are they identifying those kind of cases? And if so, let's respond and mobilize support for those individuals in whatever we can. I see there's a question here about foster kids over 18 years old going to court with it says no real defendant, no real person helping support them. Nobody's there with them. They're alone in the court against the system which they perceive as racist, which they perceive is going to be, bearing down upon them, and they feel helpless. And to me, that's, as an attorney, one of the things I want to change is to give them that voice in their corner that's going to fight for them, and tenaciously in a way that some people of privilege have fighting for them all the time. And that's the beauty of public counsel and groups I've worked with over the years. Is those are the exact kind of cases we try to identify, and we get a volunteer to go in and fight tooth and nail and do everything you can to help support justice to be in the corner of that young person.
Absolutely. Paul, you have been great, man. I mean,
well, these are challenging issues. They're historic. We're not going to change them in a moment.
Nope.
It's
going. You know
my
what?
heart bleeds over these issues.
You know what? It's a movement. You know, like I was telling, like when I got on my show. Cause look, you know, I want to understand. I am never been the type of guy that sits up and going to and blame Whitey for everything. That's just not the way I operate. I think there's public policy, personal response. There's things that we need to do in our communities to improve and to get better. And, you know, that's, of course, that's the internal conversation, but there's things that we need to do. Okay. Now, in ways we need to do. But there's a system out there that you as a white man can move freely in. And a lot of people in the Black community don't have opportunities to move so freely because we have the system of systematic racism that we have to attack. And I think as long as you have an open ear and want to say, okay, what do you want? Then that's when it's our responsibility to tell you what we want and how you and I can work. It's not all on you. It's you and I working together to make change. As long as you're willing to listen, and that's why I had you on my show, man, because you're a good guy.
Absolutely. And a fundamental principle I've always believed in is that people who've suffered oppression, and those who've never suffered oppression, should not be the ones making the rules for those who do suffer oppression. And that's why I said the change we're talking about needs to be guided by and enlightened through those in the African American community who've suffered, who've seen it, who recognize it, and can help enlighten me and help educate us about the change that's needed. So this dialogue to me is really precious and important, and my heart bleeds for the unjust suffering that African Americans have suffered and will continue to suffer because of racism and prejudice in our communities.
Well, as long as we have people like you, you know, I think that I'm confident that we can push and make change. Paul Freese, thank you, man. I told you, I was special. Former attorney, you know, philanthropist extraordinaire, doing all the work in the community, working with a lot of boys of color, doing a lot of work. I mean, this man here does more work than I've seen a lot of people of color do. So he's open, he's honest, and it again too is that, of course, we have to give you a deeper feel of what we're dealing with. But as long as you're willing to listen and work with us, man, I look forward to what we can do in the future, Paul. We got to get together and continue our work, brother.
I agree. And again, you give me hope, Richard. I hope everyone will read your book. It's packed with wisdom, and I do my best to try and make sure people are aware of it. And listening and dialogue is the hope for humanity, period. And we whites have a lot to listen to and a lot to understand. So thank you for making that ever more possible. I really mean it.
I appreciate you, Paul. So you got to do me a favor, man. Write your president, Donald Trump, a letter and tell us to stop acting a damn fool, because he won't read our mail.
The two friends are all laughing and agreeing with that. All right, Richard. God bless you, buddy. Take care. Take the fire burning.
Bye-bye. Take care. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Yeah, man. Thanks for tuning in. KingdomHood Conversation, man. I told you it was going to be one that was going to be enlightening. And, you know, I'm trying to bring on guests, you know, and bring on people who can listen to us from a different perspective. And, you know, talking to our white brothers. And again, I'll say this every time I have this show. This show is not about making white people as bad actors and black people as victims. Because white people don't owe us a damn thing, and we as black people ain't got the time to be victims. But I do believe white America, black America, both Indian, like I say, with the feather and a dot, whether you're Arab, Asian, whatever your background is, you, all of us, have a responsibility to ensure that we can live freely and safely and without systematic racism under this constitutional democracy. My name is Richard Harrison. And thank you for listening to the KingdomHood Conversation. God bless you all until next time.